Today's video is going to be hot. Greetings guys, and thank you for tuning in to another video. On this video we're going to be talking about the symptoms to diagnose a seized brake caliper and also show you a little demonstration on how to actually replace the brake caliper. When talking about the symptoms to diagnose a seized brake caliper, we're going to have to use our senses. So we're going to be using our sense of vision, our sense of smell, and our sense of touch. The main reason that a brake caliper seizes is because the piston within the caliper does not retract back. When the piston within the caliper does not retract back, there is a constant squeezing being applied to the actual rotor, and that squeezing pushes the brake pads onto the caliper and creates constant friction and constant pressure, which in turn will create excessive heat on the rotor and will give us the symptoms that we're going to be looking for when knowing if the brake caliper is seized. This excessive force being applied by the brake pads onto the rotor is going to try to slow down the rotation of the rotor and in turn potentially be felt by you, the driver, in a sense that when you are driving you might feel like the car is being underpowered because of the drag created by the rotor, almost like driving with your e-brake still stuck up as opposed to it being down. The symptoms being created can vary in terms of severity based on how bad the actual seized caliper is. However, because of the excessive heat being created on the rotor, there are a couple of telltale signs to look for. The number one thing, and the most obvious thing, depending on how seized the caliper is going to be smoke. So if you are driving and you sense a seized caliper and then you park the car, get out of the car, inspect your wheels, and you visibly see smoke coming out of the wheel well, particularly out of the brake caliper rotor region, that is an indication obviously of excessive heat being created by the potential problematic seized caliper. Along with that heat comes the next step in using our senses, where we're going to use our sense of smell. What happens because of the excessive drag of the brake pads is that we're going to actually end up getting an odor of burnt brake pads. And if you're familiar with the scent of burnt brake pads, it's very unique and it's very easy to tell. So yet another symptom, again, when you get out of the car to inspect the wheels, look for a sense of smell coming out of one of the wheel wells that's going to point you to the direction of which area has the seized caliper. The sense of smell is particularly important if you don't actually get a visible smoke coming out of the wheels, because that will lead you to where the problem is. If you've ever smelled burnt brake pads, it's a very unique smell. Once you've smelt it, it becomes later very easy to recognize because of its uniqueness. The smell sometimes can be felt when you first put a fresh pair of brake pads on your car and you're breaking them in. Sometimes you get a little bit of that smell, which is normal because of the fact that they are new brake pads settling in. But that is the smell that we're talking about to look for. Thirdly, we're going to use our sense of touch/feeling sensation. Because of the excessive heat, that heat is going to be felt. So you can walk around your car and put your hand on the wheel to see which wheel is going to be the hottest. Now, if your brake caliper is only seized mildly or partially or intermittently, it comes in and out of this when that can be the early signs of a problem leading down the road, and then the heat disparity between the wheels might not be that great. However, if you have a very seized brake caliper, the heat disparity is going to be large. So when you place your hand on the wheel or place your hand on the actual brake caliper to feel the heat disparity, one side is going to be very, very different in relationship to the other one. So that large asymmetry in heat will also point you to the problem. Another way you might be able to tell if a caliper is seized is by lifting the car up in the air and, with the wheel on, turning the wheel to see how much resistance or force it takes to spin it. So if it takes a lot of force or resistance, like what you saw right there, that is an indication that the caliper might indeed be seized. Now what you'll want to do is do the same thing to the other side in order to see how symmetric or how different this resistance or force is going to be. On my 350Z, I've identified this as the caliper that is currently seized that we will have to replace. Now, if you're new to the channel and you're wondering why there's two calipers here, do not worry. Production vehicles do not come with two sets of calipers on each rotor. This is just on my 350Z because I've installed dual rear calipers with a hydraulic handbrake. So for the purpose of this video, just ignore this caliper here. Now, if you are tuning in because you have a 350Z yourself and are actually interested in installing dual rear calipers with a hydraulic handbrake setup, such as the one that I have installed in my car here, then please search the channel. You'll find a nice overview install video on how to do this. A couple of other ways of identifying which caliper is seized is that if you take your hand and actually move the caliper, if you feel a little bit of play here, that's okay because you know that it's not stuck. I'm not sure how well it's picking up on the camera here, but there is a little bit of play that you can see as I wiggle this. Now on this side, which is currently seized, there is no movement whatsoever. It literally feels seized. Additionally, you could look for burn marks on the rotor, so a bluish tinge or a neochromatic color on the rotor is an indication of the heat that gets built up because of the seizure. You could also see some of that on the brake pad. Again, not sure how well it's going to pick up on the camera, but there is a little mark right in there. Now that we know where the problem is, we need to replace this caliper here. Calipers are pretty standard / pretty easy to disassemble and replace. Most production vehicles come with calipers such as these, which are floating calipers. Floating calipers have two parts to them: a bracket that secures the actual caliper piston onto the vehicle and the rotor, and then the actual piston portion, which is this. So the first step in removing this is to actually separate the two pieces. In order to separate the two pieces, there's two bolts, typically speaking, that are on the back that will come out. These are the slide pins or guide pins, and then you'll be able to actually remove the piston portion. The bracket will stay intact. Afterwards, you'll have to take the bracket off. Same thing, there's two bolts that hold the bracket onto the actual knuckle of the car, and you'll have to remove those. So in total, we're going to be removing two bolts and two slide pins in order to disassemble this. The bracket is often out of the way, and we still have the caliper piston portion here attached to the car via the brake line. So obviously the next thing to do would be to take this brake line off so that you can actually put the new caliper on. This is the part where do expect things will get a little messy, because when you pull this line off, inevitably there's going to be some brake fluid that leaks, and once we reattach everything, we'll obviously need to then bleed the system. The new bracket and caliper piston are in place. I did this off camera because, as I mentioned, it does create a little bit of a mess when you are taking the line off because of the brake fluid. Now, when putting the new one on, make sure that you use two new copper crush washers in order to prevent any sort of leaking. The rest is just disassembling everything. However, I want to give you a couple of pointers here when you're doing brake pads or brake jobs. So when placing the brake pads back in, you're going to notice when you have your brake pads that one of them has this little metal part on it. This is to let you know when the pad gets too far down or too worn, it starts making noise, so that you know it's time to replace the brake pads. This actually is going to go on the brake pad on the inside part of the rotor, and then also if you're doing obviously both both brake jobs at the same time, you might get confused as to which one goes in the back, whether it should go up or down the metal piece. Now that depends on the rotation or the position of the caliper. So the way this works is that you want this metal piece to be actually either on the top or bottom, depending on the caliper position, with the side that's going to come in contact with the rotating rotor, with the rotation of the rotor first. So we are working on the rear passenger side. So when moving forward, the car is going this way, meaning the rotor is going to spin like this. Since the rotor spins like this, the first point of contact is going to be up top here. So our little metal piece is going to go on the inside, back here, and on the top. Same thing when you are doing the slide pins or guide pins. There's going to be 2 guide pins, and you're going to notice that one of them has a little rubber piece on it while the other one doesn't. The rubber piece is an anti-rattle device, and the same thing, this is going to depend on which caliper you're working on. So if you get confused, always look for the rotation. So it's going to go on the top in this situation, because again, it's going on the side that the rotor is going to come in contact first when rotating. So up top here. Also, make sure that these are properly lubricated and that they slide freely when reassembling everything. Now that everything is put back together, you need to grab yourself some brake fluid and a helper to go help you bleed the system. You're gonna go press the brake pedal for me? It's inside.
Inside the top.
Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you found this video beneficial and educational. As always, if you have any questions at all for me, please just drop a comment down below and I'll be sure to get back to you. And I'll see you soon.